Would the defense like to make an opening statement at this time?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Good morning. Jermaine Bass, my client, did not shoot his children. What happened on August 29, 2022 was tragic, and you're going to hear a lot of testimony about what happened on that day. And a lot we are not going to be in dispute about with the state. Where it happened, what time it happened, how many shots were fired, things of that nature. You're going to see that there's not a lot that we're going to be disputing about. But the most important part, we are. Who was responsible? Who fired the gun that injured Jayla and JJ Bass? You're going to hear the evidence because as the judge instructed you, what we say is not evidence. The evidence you're going to hear from the witness stand and from the exhibits in this case. And when you hear the evidence, pay close attention to the timeline of the events. When Shirley calls 911 and you're going to hear that call, she is not asking for police. She's asking for an ambulance. She's asking for medical help repeatedly, and you will hear it for yourself. Mr. Terry stood up here and said that he wants you to believe that it's an accident, but pay attention to what Shirley says as well about what happened. The 911 operator is continuously asking her, who fired the gun? Did somebody drive by? And pay attention to what her answers are close in time to the events. When police start their investigation, pay attention to who the police are able to talk to right away and who they have to wait to speak to. This story about Jermaine on the highway with China Gatson and Shirley Bass doesn't come to police attention until over a year after the incident. Pay attention to who's cooperating. You'll hear from the lead detective in the case and the efforts that he made to speak to Jermaine, to JJ, and to speak to Shirley about what happened. You'll hear, obviously, that after this happened and JJ was injured, he was in the hospital for a while. And then they made efforts to speak to him once he was released. You'll hear from Detective Gabbard that Shirley was uncooperative when they tried to interview her son. That they were not able to investigate her phone because she never turned it over to law enforcement for them to look at any kind of communications that were happening that night. Shirley does not call 911 from her phone. She goes across, and the phone that she is using to dial 911 is Mr. Evans' phone, an across the street neighbor. You're going to hear that Detective Gabot had difficulty reaching out to Shirley, that they made efforts to interview JJ at the Mary Lee House. And the Mary Lee House is a location where law enforcement routinely interviews children because they're treated differently than an adult witness. And you'll hear that the first time they set it up, Shirley came, but then refused to let the interview happen. Then they tried again that afternoon, and you'll hear that JJ was disruptive, that he refused, that he walked away, and he didn't talk to them. They tried to set it up again on a later date, and he did not appear. Finally, detectives had to serve Shirley with an investigative subpoena. They tried to get her to cooperate voluntarily, but then they were trying to force it. An investigative subpoena is not an invitation, it's a demand. So she brings him in. And when they do, He says that he does not remember what happened on that night. And that's where we're left. You're not going to hear from JJ because the state and I, the defense, agree that if he was to come in, all he would say is that he doesn't remember what happened that night. So you're not going to hear from him. My client was cooperative with law enforcement. You're going to see how he brings his son down from the bedroom after his son is injured and is waiting downstairs while Shirley goes and calls 911 to get an ambulance to help him. He stays with his son. You'll see the interaction that he has with law enforcement. And pay attention to the evidence and the investigation that's done at the scene. As Mr. Terry told you, there's blood evidence at the scene. There's testing that's done. There's additional testing that is done because it's confusing. Children were moved. And so there's a question as to where things happen. And so the additional testing that was done in this case helps give you a clearer picture of what happened in that room. You'll see a purse that was found in the children's room that belonged to Shirley that has ammunition in it, and a holster, and a magazine. You'll also see an empty holster and a child's bassinet that's in the kid's bedroom, along with a little plate that has some eaten food on it. Pay attention to the inconsistencies in the testimony and the evidence. Listen not only to the answers that the witnesses say when the state asks questions, but also when we ask questions. There'll be different versions told by the witnesses and the evidence in the case. Listen with a critical ear. Use your discernment and your common sense in this case. Pay attention to where everyone is when shots are fired, what they saw and what they heard. The gun that was recovered in the master bedroom and the dresser, the testing that was done on the scene. And as the state told you, you're going to hear that not only was Jermaine, my client's DNA on the gun, but JJ's gun. And pay attention to why that area is swabbed. There's different areas that are swabbed, and the grip and the trigger are swabbed to determine who's handling the gun. That's why those areas are swabbed. And JJ's DNA is on that gun. In the end, you're going to have more questions in this case than answers. The state is going to try very hard, as you heard in opening statement, to try to convince you that my client shot his children that night. What they say is not evidence in the case or the true facts. The evidence comes from the witnesses, and you all were selected to determine what the true facts are in this case. Your job is the toughest job in this room. You have to determine what happened on a day that you were not there with people that you do not know. And it's going to be difficult and it's going to be hard. It's going to be emotional testimony, but you were picked for a reason. You agreed not to base your decision on sympathy or bias. You agreed to hold the state to their burden in this case. And you agreed to presume my client innocent. As difficult as it might be, that is your job as a juror. What happened on that day is very tragic and sad, but my client did not shoot his children. You will understand why he said what he said to police. At the end of the case, After listening to all the evidence and the law, you will agree and find Jermaine Bass not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. The state can call your first witness.
Clerical Rebecca Messelman.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Accept this one.